When Winota came, she had a huge impact in the game. She performed value and put stacks into play and had a perfect going game plan. But then when she started to perform in tournaments, she starts out strong, but quickly her win rate starts to really drop. And in this video we're gonna try to analyze why, with statistics, why she has an 15.14% win rate. Or try to, at the very least. What we've done is calculated the collective of win rate from all of those 78 decks and reached an average. Among those decks, we have 199 unique cards, so they are kinda different, deck from deck. But I would like to just quickly mention that statistic is not everything. Player skills and luck also matters. What we're gonna try to do is find cards that have some impact in the win rate. For example, here we have Eidolon of Rhetoric. Now, from 78 decks, it's played by everyone, and therefore you get an average win rate equal to the average win rate of all decks together. But if you look at this card, Esper Sentinel, it's not actually played by everyone. It's not played by 5 decks specifically. And then when you calculate the win rate of the average 73 decks that play Esper Sentinel, you get something of a 15.45% win rate, which is a little bit better than the average. Or you get something like this, Hushbringer, played by one deck, and that one deck had a 25% win rate. Now, this is a very sad example because we don't actually have that many big sample size, like one deck doesn't really showcase the actual win rate of Hushbringer in this case. Same thing with this thing. Memnite, on the other hand, was played by 6 decks, and those 6 decks did get a little bit better win rate compared to the average. Same thing with Red Elemental Blast, played by 18 decks, and those 18 decks together received an 18.33% average win rate, which is better than the average win rate of all decks together. But we can also find a few cards that are on the lower end of the thing. So for example, here we have 32 decks that played Resourceful Cleric, and they got an average win rate of 13.22, which is lower than the average win rate of Winota. Including Rograk didn't really affect much. Same thing by including this thing. Playing Rick didn't have huge impact either. Playing T-Bell's Trickery did receive a higher win rate, but we're only seeing 2 decks that actually played it, so we can't say much from that very low sample size. Playing Thalia's Lancers had a negative impact on the win rate, compared to the average of all decks calculated together. To my surprise, everyone isn't playing Celia's Conscripts, and apparently those 57 decks that actually did, they got an average win rate of 13%. So apparently not playing it might be better, maybe. Once again, statistics is not everything. Touch of the Spirit Realms had a 50-50 cut between inclusion rate, however, it did have a tiny bit increase in the win rate, so playing it could be good. Solitude was also played by a huge portion. It had a very high inclusion rate of 69 decks, a total of 88% inclusion rate, with an average win rate of all those decks collected together, 16.22. Including things like Self-Protection, Cliffside Rescuer, doesn't really have a huge impact in the win rate either, even though it's a 50-50 split. Glow Rider, played by 70 decks, had an inclusion rate of 89% and an average win rate among all of those 13.66. However, whatever card we're looking at, nothing really seems to increase Winota's win rate. It's never really getting up above 25%. There are a few cards like this one, Mana Tide, that had one deck playing it among the 78 that got a 25% win rate in that specific tournament. So sure, here you have an average hit, but the sample size is just too low. And I have a few others in the collection that we don't have enough statistics on them basically. In other words, so far all the 78 decks are basically similar versions of each other with small differences here and there. Card by card, they change a tiny bit, but nothing really seemed to have an impact in the card choice. Let me show you what I mean by jumping to this graph. Those of you who play a lot of computer games might recognize this as something of a skill chart. You see, you can break down cards into individual categories. For example, you have cards that are focused on ramp, you have counter spells, you have card draw, you have value engines, you have tutors, you have spot removal, self-protection stacks, etc, etc. On top of this, you have a win rate of 63%. What you're looking at is a individual deck with 100 cards in it, where I basically categorized all cards in that deck to various directions. So this was the best performing Winota deck, and this was one of the many worst performing Winota decks. As you can see, they aren't that different. In fact, whatever Winota deck you actually look at, they are very similar, small differences here and there. For example, this one has a little bit more rituals, and this one has a little bit more stacks. As you can see, by the way, you see that the rings grow or shrink in size. That's the amount of cards, so to say. So if you look at this one that suddenly shrunk, it didn't shrink, it just has more stacks cards in it instead. But this is still more or less how all the Winota decks looks like, regardless of whatever win rate they're actually able to achieve during a tournament. In other words, they are all more or less identical. So let's try and draw a conclusion. The current Winota plan doesn't seem to work. Her basic game plan of putting Winota into play, putting stacks cards into play, generating Winota triggers, and swing for the win receives something of a 15% win rate. In other words, it's more a question of game plan versus card choices, and in this case, I don't think it has anything to do with the card choices, I think it has something to do with the overall game plan, which also brings down to the card choices still, but I think you're getting the idea that I'm trying to present. Sticking with the same current game plan with Winota and just trying to swap out cards might not really work for you. Winota basically needs to evolve. Now, what I actually mean by that, I'm not entirely certain myself, but I think I can show you something. Take a look at this again. Now focus on the value engines and card draw here. As you can see, the graph never really climbs. By the way, the value engines inside Winota are basically Esper Sentinel, that was the only one I found. Oh yeah, and land tax. One deck did play land tax, I consider this a value engine. But Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer, and Esper Sentinel are the basically only value engines that Winota play. You could argue that Weathered Wayfarer is something of a value engine, a weak one. But once again, maybe this is something that Winota should start to focusing on. Maybe stacks and spot removal isn't really working out. I've actually made a video saying stacks is dead, really proud of that video. And I actually think that everything I said in that video applies to this situation. I just think that the game plan of Winota isn't really working and you might need to retweak it. I think that Winota should try to view her game plan differently. You see, Winota is the deck's value engine, but if Winota is being killed, interacted with, then you don't have a value engine. Relying on your commander to be your only value source of value could be a little bit risky. Just a thought. That's the only conclusion I could draw myself looking at the statistics, but sure, I could be wrong. Would love to hear your ideas of why you think Winota could be struggling currently. Winota is a really cool commander that brings a really cool concept to the format, combat and value and being rewarded from going to war. It does actually saddens me a tiny bit seeing that her win rate is quite low, don't get me wrong. I wanna emphasize that you can go to a tournament with Winota and perform great, might even win, but the average win rate when played by the collective is lower than the average.